June 2016, on the 23rd, the British people voted for leaving the EU. The whole situation is called Brexit, and the topic has been debated in all of Europe. But what led up to Brexit, and why would Britain leave the EU in the first place? The British people were in doubt whether they should vote for or against an EU leave. The UK is a very powerful country and has a big influence on the topics discussed in the EU Parliament. The voting would be a decisive turning point for Europe and the UK in numerous ways, especially economical and political.
The people of Britain have voted for Brexit. This is a decision that will transform this nation and Europe forever.
Many of the primary arguments against Brexit are based upon the economical and immigration problems.
The immigration crisis has had a huge influence on the opinions of the Brits. Choosing to stay in the EU would mean for the UK to take in roughly 1.2 million immigrants over the next decade due to EU laws.
However, as seen, the Brits aren't always equally fond of newcomers, and with the immigrants already tightly packed throughout the UK, this could prove to be quite a difficult problem.
As for the trading, leaving the EU would mean that the UK's trading program will diversify, meaning that the trade links with both China and India will strengthen.
However, 44% of the British trade goes to the other EU countries. So when leaving the EU, we also complicate our export, which then will work counterproductively with the British economy. The pros and cons of Brexit are widely discussed in Britain. Yesterday, our Prime Minister, David Cameron, expressed his opinion on the matter.
We get involved. We take a lead, we make decisions, and we get things done. If we left, our neighbors will go on meeting and making decisions that profoundly will affect us, our nation, our jobs. But we wouldn't be there. They would be making decisions about us, but without us. Britain is better off in the EU than at our own. We need to stand together as a big, strong, and united union. Experts whose job is to warn prime ministers, as I am, have said that it will shrink our economy. In the short term, facing recession. In the medium term, during a decade of uncertainty, and in the long term, living with fewer jobs, lower wages, and higher prices. These are risks to our families that should not be taken. I know Europe isn't perfect, and I understand your frustrations. That's why we negotiated and enhanced our social status. Out of the euro, keeping our borders, not involved in ever closer union. We have the best of both worlds.
Hello and welcome! Tonight we're going to discuss the hot topic, Brexit. And with us today in the studio we have James Miller. Hey, welcome. And Carter Johnson. Welcome. First, we're going to listen to James Miller, who is an expert on the topic, and he is against Brexit. So,
Well, first of all, there's an enormous economical problem with it, being that the EU Britain trade brings in approximately 400 billion pounds a year, and that a study shows that 1 in 10 of the British people's jobs are directly linked to the EU. So with leaving the EU, we also cut these ties and then lose approximately 10% of the GPD.
so James thinks that the immigration in the UK is a positive thing. But what about Carter? What's your viewpoint on immigration in the UK?
Well, contrary to what James believes, I actually see that immigration poses a real threat to the UK. And currently with the EU regulations, we're forced to take in, over the next decade, 1.2 million immigrants, which could have a huge economic deficit on the UK. But by leaving the EU, we wouldn't be forced to do that, and we could make our own border restrictions and our own border control to ensure that we only get who's fit for the country into the country.
Understandable. So both arguments seem fairly reasonable. But what are the experts' viewpoints on the immigration issue? James, do you think immigration is a problem?
No, I don't actually. I think that if handled correctly, these immigrants will provide a positive effect on the UK economy and annual GDP.
That sounds like a huge problem to me. Let's see what our other guest and expert, Carter Johnson, responds to that.
Well, personally, I believe that regarding the UK economy, we actually stand to gain from Brexit, because studies have shown that we lose upwards of 125 billion pounds each year due to the EU regulations. And what's more is that the EU would still be interested in keeping up its trade ties with us, especially due to us being such a large part of their economy as well, not only the other way around.
So that's all for this debate. Thanks, Carter Johnson, for
Thank you.
participating, and James Miller.
Thanks for having us.
And now, for all the viewers out there, happy voting. May the odds be ever in your favor. The people.
Ej, 2. Jeg er uskyldig, dreng. Jeg er
Many of the primary arguments against Brexit are based upon the
Economic.
As for the trading, leaving the EU would mean that Britain's trading program. Welcome to the nice.
Well, first of all, there is an enormous economical deficit, with the British trade bringing in around approximately 400 billion pounds a year. Det går jo ikke.
Well, that sounds like a huge problem to me. Let's see what our other guest.
Although we might exit the EU would still be interested in keeping up its trade ties with us, and so I see no reason for us to stay, as we would just be gaining that extra 125 billion dollars. Problem for the UK economy. Hvad sidder han og laver?
Ej, jeg prøver bare at holde den fat. Jeg skulle lige holde balancen her.
Britain is better off. These are
The people of.
Kom bare. Jeg så tager det sammen.